Well, tonight I thought we could talk about the 4 pairs of mundane concern. So this is a enumeration, you could say, that comes out of Buddhism. They like to enumerate things. And so 4 pairs of mundane concern, of worldly concern. It's also sometimes called the 8 winds of worldly concern. So here are the 4 pairs. Pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, respect and disrepute. So the question is, how much of our life, time and energy have we spent in pursuit? Trying to gain pleasure, praise, respect, gain of some goal, and how much time have we spent trying to avoid pain, loss, blame, or disrespect? How much of our life energy have we played that game? And to what end? So, I mean, to really consider that, I mean, we can say, well, the Buddha pointed that out, so maybe it's worthy of a little consideration. But I think what's more important is just to reflect on how we spend our own life energy and how much of that is really spent in the pursuit of the good aspects and avoidance of the ones that we don't like, right? How much of our life energy do we spend seeking and avoiding? And it sounds like, well, that's sort of what life is about, isn't it? Looking, trying to arrange things so I have good experiences and try to maneuver myself through the world so that I avoid as much pain and loss and blame as possible. That's sort of the game. But what is really underlying this game is that the whole concept is that in order to be happy, somehow I need to seek pleasurable experiences. I need to, gain from my adventures out in life, in my careers or relationships or wealth or whatever, some sense of gain, a little praise and pats on the back along the way, feel good, and to be respected maybe among friends or in the community somehow. It seems like perfectly normal, reasonable things to do in order to feel happy, right? Right. The idea of uncaused happiness just feels too unreliable, right? We can't count on it. If it's uncaused, it may happen, maybe it's not, but so I'll opt for going about it. We don't actually say this to ourselves, but this is what's actually happening. We believe that if we pursue, pleasurable events, if we pursue somehow to gain more for ourselves out in the world, be respected, those kinds of things, then happiness will result. Those pursuits, that seeking is sort of an indirect way to get to happiness, but it feels like it's a more reliable way. I know what I have to do, and if I just do those things, then I'll be happy. That's sort of what we were taught in a way, play by the rules, work hard, be fair, and you'll be happy. But the issue with that is that you may have noticed that life doesn't always work out that way. I mean, sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes the tide comes in, and sometimes the tide goes out. So when it doesn't work out like we expected it would, whatever our latest venture is, and it doesn't quite work out the way we'd hoped, and we get upset or disappointed or disheartened or angry or wanting to blame somebody. We sort of lash out because life doesn't work out as if it should, right? As if we have every right to expect that it'll always work out in our favor. So when it doesn't, we feel like, well, we're justifiably upset. This other person sort of didn't respond like I expected them to or wanted them to. So I'm hurt, and justifiably so. Right? So we don't actually need life to provide the downsides, the sense of pain or loss or blame or things like that. We're perfectly capable of doing that to ourselves. Life will provide the triggering event, but the real suffering is caused when we turn that on ourselves, that something should have happened and didn't, or something shouldn't have happened and did. Somebody said something that was unfair, out of line, etc. So we all know those things happen. But the suffering comes when out of our expectation that somehow life should comply with what we want, what we expect, almost what we demand from life. And when it doesn't pay out for my benefit, then somehow I have the right to be annoyed by it, angry. But hopefully this doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, that life doesn't always turn out in our favor. That's not what life is really about. If everything was just comfortable and easy, would there ever be any movement to change or look deeper? I mean, if everything was just comfortable, going our way, would we ever bother to look more deeply? I was thinking that I've been to Tahiti and Fiji, and places that are at least historically were about as comfortable a place to live as you could get. The weather was always beautiful. Had just enough rain every day. Things grew in abundance. There's lots of fish to eat from the sea, just right at hand there. You didn't have to heat your houses. I mean, life was about as easy as it could possibly get. Right? But those cultures, both of them actually, and other South Sea islands as well, where this was true, where life was as easy as it possibly could be. What developed was sort of tribalism, conflict, cannibalism. It's almost like human nature couldn't really look more deeply, and got caught up in just the pettinesses that got blown out of hand. So, you look at, let's say, well, just take those two islands, Fiji and Tahiti. Um, can anyone name a major religion or spiritual insight that came out of those cultures? I can't. Um, so it's almost like there's some degree of disappointment, heartache, um, challenge that's really needed to balance out um, the good times that life offers as well. If it's just always pleasurable, then in some sense we're like a small child, wanting only to eat the ice cream and not the broccoli. But we all know if you know give in to that, pretty soon you end up with a sick child. So it's interesting to look at this movement, like where we're seeking pleasure and gain and praise and respect and those kind of things that seem such a natural part of life. We almost ask, well, what's really wrong about it? Why does Buddha have a problem with that? It seems like a perfectly natural way to go. But in some sense, when we think, it's not um, the pleasurable experiences in themselves that are a problem. We're even in this spiritual endeavor. Hopefully, we're not so carried away by it that we refuse to allow ourselves pleasurable experiences when they arise. Wonderful, great, no problem. The issue comes in the pursuit of them. It's not welcoming them and enjoying them fully when they arrive. That isn't the issue at all. The religious sects that have tried extreme self-denial and self-flagellation in the name of spirituality, it didn't turn out well. You end up with egoic fanatics. So that's not at all what we're talking about here. So it's obviously when unfortunate things happen to us, it feels good. We can admit that, because it does, right? It feels good. Somebody pats us on the back, says, nice going, job well done. Feels good, right? We don't have to deny that. But if we're arranging our life in order to have those circumstances, in the belief that if once we do, then we'll be happy or happier than we are now, then that's where the problem arises. It's that seeking something from some circumstances that we say are not present now. Therefore, I'm seeking them in the future. I'm seeking, to gain this pleasurable experience, right? So what we're really saying is that the happiness that I hope to have then, when I get there, isn't available to me now. Right? The other aspect of that is that even when those fortunate circumstances happen, which they will, right? Wonderful. Is that they are never ultimately fulfilling. It's just the nature of form, right? And they don't last as long as we'd like. So even when we achieve those things that we seek, we're left wanting, right? For a moment, that wanting is satisfied. That's what feels good. There's no more wanting. We've gotten what we want, so there's no more wanting, at least temporarily. But we all know that wears off rather quickly. we can, I don't know, get a new stereo system and it's great, wonderful, everything I always wanted. And then a week later, it's still there. It still works just as well as it did the first day. It's just not quite as satisfying. And then a month later, it's like, okay, I'll turn it on. So the wanting always returns. Whatever is gained, whatever pleasurable experiences, whatever successes, it's never ultimately satisfying. It's never permanently satisfying. And even when it's happening, haven't you noticed that there's this sense of, yeah, but it won't last, when's the other shoe gonna drop? There's some felt sense of underlying anxiety, like, that it won't last forever. Because it's not permanent, right? If we want permanent, what we get is like a plastic flower. It's permanent, looks like a flower, more or less, just doesn't have quite the same scent as a real flower does. So it's actually the beauty of it is that there is always this movement, this change, this, life is continuously presenting the next experience that, but we miss that when we're trying to hang on to this one and avoid that one. And, we're always trying to manage our experience. So there's the experience, and then there's the manager, me, that's trying to, prolong this experience and avoid that one. So we have this almost like a third party involved. It's not just, whatever I am plus the experience, that interaction. It's like that plus this manager person is trying to maintain this. So the first thing to be noticed about these pairs of worldly concern is that we expect there to be a payoff by playing this game. That sort of how life works, to seek things and seek the good things and try to avoid the difficult things. And some of us are better at it than others. Some of us, because of our conditioning, we're trained, had the education, had the parental counseling, had the innate intelligence, had the schooling, whatever, to function, reasonably well in society and have the benefits of some of the perks of society. Some of us, for whatever reason, maybe didn't value that or didn't have those same kinds of opportunities, felt, somewhat, neglected by society, we didn't have quite the same fruits as other people. And but either way, either side of that fence that you feel like you're on, what we're talking about here is functioning in society out of one's conditioning. And it's true. And from a relative perspective, being able to function in society has some, financial and benefits to it. Okay. But to conclude that somehow this kind of conditioning is better than that kind of conditioning is false, right? Just different. In both cases, if we're operating fully out of our conditioning, whether it's working out well for us or whether it's not really working all that well, either way, if we're operating fully out of our conditioning, we're still living in a dream. We might say, yeah, but my dream's, more functional. It's still a dream. still a dream. We're still asleep and fully reactive to whatever our conditioning happens to be. Right? Some of it's useful, some of it may be dysfunctional, but if we're still unaware of the conditioning, or we still choose to hold our conditioning in place by our belief that it has value, or that it's true, or that it's beneficial, to that degree, we are held captive by it. So the conditioning remains in place in one of two ways. One is that we believe it's necessary, we believe it's true. My beliefs are correct. I'm quite certain of that. That holds it in place. Or just simply being unaware of it, being oblivious to the extent to which the conditioning is operating in our lives. Either way holds it in place. And the way out of that maze isn't just to try to get rid of it, try to just, sort of forcibly eject it. It's really just to see clearly how it operates. If we're caught up in it, we can't get a good look at it. If we're trying to manage it, by that I mean manage our experience, then we're caught up in it. We're in the middle of a dust cloud and we can't really get a good look at what's happening. But if we can step back and get a good look at the conditioning, that has the potential to free us. So by getting a good look at it, what I don't mean just acting out every dysfunctional belief that we have, but I mean being willing to allow that sense to arise within us without judgment, without trying to change it or fix it. Just see it. That's what's needed. Have the courage to just look it straight in the eye and see what it is. And I'm not saying that's easy, and I'm not saying it's not necessarily without pain. It's painful to see the extent to which conditioning has contributed to our sorrow, our suffering in this lifetime. It's painful, but we get to choose whether we want comfort or truth. If we choose comfort, we don't ever drop in deeply enough to see what's actually true. We're just trying to feel good, right? But if we want to know what's true, that's where the real relief lies. And anything that causes us suffering is at the root of it held in place by belief. I would say held in place by false belief, but that's redundant. Whatever the belief is, it's not ultimately true. So in that sense, all beliefs, all certainty in our own opinions and our own ideas, what should and shouldn't be, how the world should be, how I should be, all of that is not ultimately true. And when we believe that it is, we suffer. The equation's pretty simple that way. When we find ourselves suffering, we know that we're holding on to something, an idea, belief, judgment, a blame of ourself or others that's not true. So it's It's a good indicator. And like I say, it can be painful. I was reflecting today on a situation in my own life. I was on retreat with Adyashanti. It was probably the third day in silent retreat, and I was late for lunch. I was headed to lunch, and Adyashanti, who's the teacher, had finished lunch early, and he was coming the other way. We were the only two people on the walkway for 100 yards, so I could see him coming from a long way away, and we we're going to walk right by each other. And he knew. I mean, we weren't buddies, but he knew who I was, and so I had, I don't know, good 15 seconds to decide how I was going to respond to that situation, right? So the long and short of it is that how I responded was totally contrived, totally inauthentic. And Adi just glanced up and could see what was happening in a moment, and just gave this look of disgust. And so that has an impact, right? When your teacher, sort of glances at you and sees your inauthenticity and responds viscerally that way. So, but the lesson was clear. The lesson about not pretending to be happier than you really were, more spiritual than, not to pretend to be something that you weren't, to sort of relax and be who you are. I mean, it's a hard lesson, but to be able to see a truth about yourself like that. But it's actually those circumstances where that are painful when they happen. You may not choose to repeat it ever again, whatever those kind of circumstances may be for you. But we also, in retrospect, wouldn't choose not to have had that experience, right? And it's really those experiences that are the most challenging are the ones that cause the most movement, right? The ones that we do everything that we can to try to avoid are the ones that are actually the most transformational. The situations that are the most comfortable, the most easy, the most, those are fine too, but they don't really result in deep transformation. So I'm not saying we have to seek out challenging circumstances. Life does a perfectly good job of that. But the point here is that when they do occur, we can either react, argue that they shouldn't be happening to me, this is why, or we can receive it more in the sense of a gift that life is giving us. So what we've been talking about here so far is the first way that these pairs of mundane concerns just don't pay off, right? They're not worth the price that we pay. So the second reason that I'm guessing the Buddha sort of made the effort to point these out is that they're expensive. They're expensive in terms of our energetic and psychological output, right? To try to, the amount of energy, life energy that we spend, trying to manipulate life, move the chess pieces around on the board enough that it pays off as we want it to and avoids the pitfalls, right? To go back to jail card we try to not to get that one, right? So again, we don't, it's not that we can't enjoy things when they do happen, or be impacted by things when challenging things happen, but when we spend our life energy, um, trying to arrange things like that, and then life still happens, was that amount of energy, time, life energy expended, was it worth it? Was it a good investment? Right? We would ask the same question if we were investing in a house, or you know, our 401k plan or whatever, or buying a car. We'd ask those questions, but spirituality, or our life in general, often we don't ask. Is it worth all of my effort to try to arrange my life, and then life shows up as it does? um, you know, is it worth that that emotional expenditure? Is it really worth that? But we think, well, with all of that energy that I've expended, life has turned out only pretty well, or okay. But if I didn't even make that effort, then what would happen? Right? That's the logic. So I don't really want to take a chance of not trying to manage my life, just letting it flow, just let life happen, because who knows what would happen then. Right? But one of the things that would happen is that all of that mental and psychological energy that we spent worrying about and trying to maneuver life to suit us, we would save that energy for better things. Like really trying to see what's happening here, for example. So by this I mean, allowing life to unfold rather than trying to manage it. So what I mean by this is just, however it shows up is not to try to grab onto it, to hold something beyond its shelf life, not to, you know, go into a nosedive because something more challenging happens. It happens. That's how life unfolds. We know that, but it's only our expectations that somehow it should work out better for me, that we get caught in this pattern of hope and reactivity, expectations, dashed expectations, judgments, blame, etc. So all of that is besides and apart from and added on top of what is actually happening. So if we can just be with how life unfolds, and here's sort of the key, is to trust life to unfold in a way that it is what we need to learn, what we need to learn next. And to trust life, give life that role rather than trying to manage that role as well. Right? We can also give up, our tendency to judge other people or ourselves. We can give up, all our ideas about what should and shouldn't happen, and just be with what is happening and how we choose to respond to that in the most integrous way that we can. That's what we can do. We can choose to drop our certainties in our beliefs that our mind wants to interject into situations, and just see that they're not ultimately true, and it's just what the mind does. So the way to sort of unhook ourselves from this patterning and use that energy for more productive things is actually not to try to ditch the conditioning or you know trying to change our experience, but really to just allow whatever does arise to be seen as objectively as we can, you know, without self-judgment, without blame, without subjecting it to our opinions, just see it clearly. So that's the second thing. It's these 4 pairs of mundane concerns eat up a lot of energy, life energy, maybe even our entire life, if we don't ever see our way clear of it. Okay, so there's one, the third area that these pursuits take away from us is they maintain that sense of personal separate self, right? Because all of that seeking and avoiding, gaining and losing, all of that has to do with me. All of those things have to do with the personal self, the enhancement of it, under the belief that if I play that game and I play that game well, then I'll be happy, right? So it's really, the end goal is really happiness. But we feel like we need to do these things in order to, I guess, feel good enough about ourselves that we grant ourselves the right to feel happy. Right? So, I mean, but the question is, were those actually needed? All that time and energy pursuing those things. You would only do that if you believe that happiness was absent now, unavailable now, that peace, joy, love is absent now, and that somehow I have to do these things in order to qualify for it, right? So it's a denial of what can only be found here and now in hopes of finding it there and then somehow. So, I mean, it's a game that we won't win. And by playing it, it enhances this sense of separate self. It enhances the belief that I have to do this in order to feel good enough about myself, to really enjoy happiness. But if we believe that what we are is limited to this body mind, this physicality, right? The thoughts in my head, the presence of this body. If I believe that is the entirety of what I am, then the consequence of that belief is that conditioning is part of that package, right? So any effort that we have to try to extricate ourselves from our, the conditioning that's not functional, not leading us to a life that, we would like to have. It is part of that package. It's inseparable from the belief in a separate body mind. If we believe in a limited body mind, that consciousness is a product of our brain, that our thoughts are real, that our beliefs are true, and we're quite certain that we have fundamentally are a body mind, and part of that package is our conditioning. And any attempt to undo that conditioning will be as successful as trying to push and pull a door at the same time. It's not going to go anywhere. The only way to move beyond that limitation is to at least start with acknowledging the possibility that what we are is this spaciousness, this awareness, this ability to notice, this formlessness. At least open ourselves to that possibility, open ourselves to be curious, to wonder whether that might actually be true, because that is the freedom, that is the only freedom from the confinement of this body mind, as beautiful as these forms are. I mean, we're not trying to diminish these forms in any way. I mean, they're spectacular, right? They're amazing. They're even more amazing when viewed from awareness. Because then we get to experience them without feeling limited by them. And that makes all the difference. Anything less than that, we're convinced that what we are fundamentally is this form. This form will one day cease. And, we know that. We may not want to know that, but we do know that. So if we limit ourselves to that belief in the fundamental nature of this body mind, then we'll always be struggling with that conditioning. We'll always be dealing with fear. And we'll miss the opportunity in this lifetime to experience what is possible. What is possible, what's ultimately freeing. And what's ultimately freeing doesn't require, actually doesn't require effort. May require effort to realize it, but once it's realized, there still needs to be, some level of vigilance, but it's not vigilance to gain anything. It's just, noticing, being present to notice when something's off, when something's causing, by off, I just mean causing us to suffer. So it's an indication that, we're not looking at something quite right. And then sort of the course is corrected, and we're back to just this sense of our natural being, right? So this natural being isn't a high state, it's what we are. It's what we are already. It's what all of us are already. We've just been deluded into believing that we're something less than that. And what that awareness actually is already limitless. We can't find an edge to it. It's inclusive. Everything that we have ever experienced has happened within it, within what we are ultimately. And that recognition is where fear drops away, because it doesn't feel like anything is outside. The entirety of it is within what we are, not as a person, obviously, not as a separate entity, just within the one existence. And what we are already is not other than that in any way separate from that. The only thing that could convince us that we're separate from that is the next belief. That's it. Doesn't mean that it's true. Doesn't create actual separation. It's just our imagined separation, and we get to suffer for it unnecessarily. Until we've had enough and we decide to look at it differently. And from that, you could say, more elevated perspective, where we're looking at this function, this body mind function with, its quirks and challenges and ideas. You can see that and just be with that with some compassion. Treat it gently. It's not. It's just what happened along the way, and without the challenges that happened along the way, none of us would be here tonight on a program like this. So there's no point in regretting anything that's happened. It was all, one day, or perhaps even now, we can see it's all been necessary. All been necessary to get us here. To know what we know now, to see what we have the opportunity to see now. So that's the opportunity in this lifetime, not to squander our energies pursuing avenues that are incapable of paying off in the way that we hope they will. The next experience, the next pleasure, the next adventure, the next gain. Nice when they happen, feel good, but the pursuit of those dissipates our life energy that can be used to discover what we truly are. That which reveals the innate happiness that's been there all along, but it's quiet. It's quiet. It's waiting for us to notice it. But that happiness, the true happiness, is the fountain that keeps on flowing. And when we tap into that, when we recognize that, just this movement of seeking and grasping and avoiding, all of that drops away by itself. It just doesn't make sense anymore. It's not like we really have to try not to feel good about things. That's nonsense. It's when we discover that true source of happiness, just our innate, quiet aliveness, and recognize its sufficiency, that lure to seek happiness outside of ourselves dissipates. We can still find ourselves in really beautiful, joyful circumstances. Wonderful. It's just that the seeking of it, the wanting, the longing, that's what drops away. We get to enjoy it, but we can do it without trying to manage our experience. That's the freedom of it.